Welcome back, everyone. In this session, we will continue to investigate changes that took place in the Korean Empire period. Specifically, we'll be looking at how the proclamation of the Korean Empire resulted in the alteration of visual codes used by the state to present itself as an empire. This includes changes made to dress codes, palace grounds, court customs, and objects used in court. Now that we've looked at the historical context behind the opening of ports and the proclamation of the Korean Empire, let's move on to changes that took place in visual culture and representation of the new empire. When King Gojong decided to proclaim Joseon as Korean Empire, the country was hardly thriving. Indeed, the proclamation of the Korean Empire can be seen as an attempt to recover from the severe infringement of sovereignty and threat to independence at the end of the 19th century. The height of these threats was the assassination of Queen Min in 1895 and Gojong's evacuation to the Russian legation in 1896. Despite crippling circumstances, Gojong attempted to rebuild the country by presenting itself as an independent and competitive nation-state. One of the ways in which Gojong displayed the new empire was through the modernization of the military, the implementation of Western uniforms for both soldiers and civil officials, as well as Western customs of official national representation. In the 19th century, military uniforms of Western nations were ostentatious signs of national identity, power, and progress. Many non-Western nations, including Korea, benchmarked these uniforms. Similarly, diplomatic officials were also given new Western uniforms to be worn for official duties from 1899. These visible changes to Korea's national representation were aimed toward improving Korea's public image. The proclamation of the Korean Empire warranted major improvement of its military. International relations of the 19th century were dictated by military power and economic prosperity that derived from colonial expansionism. Joseon Korea had been made acutely conscious of this from the several cases of attack from foreign powers and the demonstration of the might of modern weaponry and technology. The Joseon court had dispatched several teams of diplomats and technicians to China and Japan to survey and bring back advanced knowledge on weapons. There were continued attempts to modernize the military from 1881, and the court made several changes to military uniforms and selected Western designs for soldiers from 1895. Japanese precedents of modernization, including the implementation of Western military uniform, were particularly important references for the Korean Empire. Even after the assassination of Queen Min, Japan was seen as a model example of successful modernization and Westernization. Not only were Western attires implemented, but traditional robes for government officials were elevated to represent an empire. Joseon officials traditionally wore robes that were 2 ranks lower compared to Chinese equivalents. From the Korean Empire period, Korean officials were given robes of the same rank as Chinese officials, expressing the elevated status of the Korean Empire that equaled China. Similar alterations were made to the new emperor's own attire. In addition to traditional robes worn by government officials, new Western-style uniforms were given to civil officials who represented Korea abroad. These ceremonial robes, such as that worn by Park Ki-jong, also benchmarked Japanese precedents. The implementation of these new clothes expressed the Korean Empire's desire to be seen as a competitive, modernized, and autonomous nation-state, and rid of its past image of the hermit or a small Chinese vassal state. On the 12th of October 1897, King Gojong ascended the Hwanggudan altar to proclaim himself emperor and Joseon the new 대한제국, or the Korean Empire. For this ritual, Gojong, or Emperor Gwangmu, wore a 12-symbol ceremonial robe and a crown with 12 rows of beads, fit for an emperor. He also began to wear yellow imperial dragon robes for his daily duties. This was a symbolic elevation of the Korean monarch's attire. In the Joseon dynasty, the king would wear a robe with 9 symbols and a crown with 9 rows of beads for major rituals and ceremonies, and a red dragon robe for everyday duties. This was in lieu of Sinocentric visual codes and was an expression of respect and subordinance to the empire of the central country, China. Only the Chinese emperor could wear yellow robes, 12-symbol ceremonial robes, and a crown with 12 rows of beads. The Joseon monarch, as king of a tributary state, was given robes and crowns that were of lower rank. Gojong's proclamation of the Korean Empire and his new crown and robes were a visual statement of Korea's complete departure from the pre-modern, Sinocentric world order. However, Gojong's statement of independence and autonomy was still reliant on the utilization of Chinese visual codes. While he aimed to portray Korea as an independent and equal state as Qing China, he could not refrain from using traditional Sinocentric color codes that traditional Korean culture was based on. There was a general shift in the use of other symbols in court. For instance, while the symbol of a pair of phoenixes were used to symbolize the Joseon king, a pair of dragons were used as a symbol of the new emperor. Similarly, the court was now able to produce golden or jade dragon imperial seals, in addition to the conventional golden turtle seals used by Joseon kings. Gojong also began to wear modern attire from the Korean Empire period. He had already cut his top knot after the implementation of the 1895 Tanbalyeong law to encourage Koreans to follow suit. As part of his modernization agendas of the Gwangmu year, also known as the Gwangmu reforms, he also began to dress in Western attire. From 1899, Gojong dressed in Western military uniform that was designed based on Japanese, French, and Prussian uniforms. Significant expense was dedicated to the commissioning and import of these royal uniforms, which can be understood as a new empire's aspiration to modernize the image of Korea and the court. The new imperial emblem of the plum blossoms was included in their design, and uniforms were decorated with Western-style medals and ribbons of the Korean Empire and those gifted from foreign nations. However, rather than completely discarding traditional robes, the new Korean emperor maintained both styles of attire and used them appropriately for different occasions. After Gojong left the Russian legation, Gyeongwon Palace or Deoksugung Palace became the central palace of Korea. Although Gojong had received foreign guests before the proclamation of the Korean Empire, guests to the palace greatly increased, and the court's reception of these guests became more westernized. In consideration of Western guests who were unfamiliar with traditional customs of bowing, kneeling, and sitting on the floor, Western-style chairs, tables, and carpets entered reception rooms, and the king received standing bows or curtsies. In Western fashion, individual invitations were sent out to guests and nameplates were placed on dining tables according to seating plans. The court also offered course meals of both Korean and Western cuisine, using Western tableware and silverware, sometimes supplemented with Korean plates, bowls, and cutlery as needed. There were mixed views on the gradual westernization of court customs by Western guests. While several left accounts of being pleasantly surprised by the emperor's knowledge of Western customs and objects, individuals like Arnold Henry Savage Landor, who visited Korea in 1891, recollected that he was disappointed when he saw the king sitting in a cheap foreign armchair when he had a magnificent traditional throne. Those who visited Korea in the late 19th and early 20th century, with the fascination and curiosity of the exotic East, often longed to see uniquely Korean culture, contrary to Gojong's desire to modernize and westernize the court and country. New styles of decorative arts also appeared in the imperial court. In addition to the traditional court-style paintings and screens that decorated the palace, Paintings that used gold foil began to be produced from the Korean Empire period. These folding screen paintings emulated Japanese golden folding screens that were gifted to Joseon, China, and Western nations from the mid-19th century as diplomatic gifts. Korean golden folding screens retained elements of traditional Joseon court-style paintings and signs of influence from more intricate and naturalistic signs of Japanese screen paintings. As such, much of the visual culture and codes used by the Korean Empire were a mixture of the traditional and new, and were implemented to portray Korea as an independent, sovereign, and competitive nation-state that was willing to be part of the international society. In this session, we have investigated the various changes made to visual codes and cultures of court life in the Korean Empire period. In our next session, we will discuss changes made to the capital city after the proclamation of the Korean Empire.